Hello, everybody. Hello. Okay, I always hate to interrupt people's conversations, but I will. I always want to do the thing like my kids' teachers did. Wow. Okay. All right. Sorry to interrupt everyone, but we do want to go ahead and get started so we have plenty of time for this conversation tonight. Welcome, everybody. My name's Laurie Gilman. I'm the owner of East City Bookshop, and I'm really happy to have all of you here on this wonderful leap day. So, what better day to do, what better thing to do with an extra day in the year than have another author event, one extra? Okay, before we get to our discussion of Michael Ware's new book, The Spirit of Our Politics, let me just ask how many of you are here for the first time? Ah, excellent. We love to have new people, and we hope this will be the first of many times that you're here. Just to shop, you can also do that online. I can't miss an opportunity to say these things. Um, and if you'll go to our website or our social media, you'll see that we have many author events, an average of about 3 each week. We have 14 store-sponsored book clubs that meet in this space every month, some for kids and adults. So we always have something going on. Yes, it's a lot of book clubs. We love a book club. So please, we hope to see you as much as possible. Some quick housekeeping. Just so everyone knows, restrooms are upstairs to the left past the registers. You can also purchase the books upstairs and then come back down for the signing line, which will happen after the event. There will be a chance for audience questions after the discussion. And I think that is all the housekeeping. Yes. All right. On to the main event. Michael Ware is founder, president, and CEO of the Center for Christianity and Public Life, a nonpartisan nonprofit institution based in the nation's capital, right here. That sounds so formal. With the mission to contend for the credibility of Christian resources in public life for the public good. He has served as a trusted resource and advisor for a range of civic leaders on matters of faith and public life for the last 15 years, including as White House and presidential campaign staffer. Ware previously led Public Square Strategies, a consulting firm he founded that helps religious organizations, political organizations, businesses, and others effectively navigate the rapidly changing American religious and political landscape. Understatement. The book to be discussed this evening, The Spirit of Our Politics, Spiritual Formation and the Renovation of Public Life, argues that the kind of people we are has much to do with the kind of politics and public life we will have. In conversation with Michael this evening, we welcome David Brooks. David Brooks is a columnist for the New York Times and a contributor to The Atlantic. He's a commentator on PBS NewsHour and founder and chair of Weave, the Social Fabric Project. His latest book is How to Know a Person, The Art of Seeing Others Deeply and Being Deeply Seen. His previous 3 books were all #1 New York Times bestsellers. Mr. Brooks has taught at Yale and Duke University and at the University of Chicago. Please join me in welcoming Michael Ware and David Brooks.
Thank you Michael for coming to my neighborhood.
Yeah, good to be here.
This is the first time in my life I've ever walked from my home to a book event, so I'm very happy to be here. This is not only a very good book, this is a very profound book, and I would say an uplifting book. I read it again this afternoon, and I feel better about myself. I don't know if I feel better about the world, but I feel my spirit has been soaring all afternoon. So thank you for that. I'm going to begin by reading you the very first sentence of chapter 1. And you'll see, folks, right away that this is not a normal book on politics. It's much deeper. So first sentence: we cannot separate out the kind of politics we have our laws, our political leaders and institutions, our political culture from the kind of people we are. So what does that mean?
Well, first, thank you for being in this conversation with me. And thank you for all of you for attending. The kind of people we are has much to do with the kind of politics we have. T.S. Eliot wrote that the great human endeavor has been to try to create a system so perfect that people no longer have to be good. But of course, that's a fool's errand. The beauty and difficulty of democracy is that our democracy cannot completely work around the kind of people we are. It's just always going to bump up against that. And so, look, one of the ways I talk about this in the book is through the framework of political sectarianism. And political sectarianism was a framework for how to think about the kind of polarization we have in our politics today. And the social scientists who advanced it said the kind of polarization we have today is a toxic cocktail of three primary ingredients: aversion, a tendency to dislike and distrust those who are politically different; othering, a tendency to place as separate and apart from those who you disagree with politically; and then moralization, or a misplaced moralization, which elevates political disagreement from disagreement to that of iniquity, or good and evil. We see this logic work out in our politics all of the time. And what's interesting is not just what it does to citizens, to people who are sort of in that environment, but I think there's good evidence, and it's the testimony of elected officials, that they are now making decisions depending on the fact that citizens are going to be driven by these things. And so we're caught in a vicious cycle of aversion, othering, and moralization. And if we want a different kind of politics, it's going to require us becoming a different kind of people.
Now, George Will wrote a book called Statecraft is Soulcraft many years ago.
Yeah.
And his argument was the government shapes our souls, that the laws we live within and the customs we live within shape who we are. Do you think we are becoming coarsened and damaged on a spiritual and inner level by participating in the kind of politics that we have around us?
Yes. Politics is causing spiritual harm in America. And a big reason for that is Americans are going to politics to get spiritual needs met. Our politics is not capable of meeting those needs. But here's the thing about democracy. Here's the thing about politics. If that's what people are going to politics for, you will have, and it will attract politicians who are willing to make the promise that they can meet those needs. Our politics has become a reservoir for our loves, our hatreds, our antagonisms, and it's a toxic environment. It also crowds out a space for our politics to be about loving our neighbor, for our politics to be about the common good, for our politics to be about making improvements within the limited realm of politics, making improvements to people's lives. So it's not just a loss to a harm to individuals. It actually distorts what our politics is and what it can be.
Now, you are a fan of a guy named Dallas Willard. There's going to be a two-part question. I'm going to ask you to describe who Dallas Willard is and what he meant to you. And Dallas Willard wrote a book called The Renovation of the Heart. And if politics is a seductive but failed form of moral formation, what's the alternative?
Yeah. So Dallas Willard was a philosopher. He taught at the University of Southern California for nearly a half a century. He was at times a chair of the philosophy department. He also was a Christian teacher and author. He wrote Renovation of the Heart, Divine Conspiracy, Spirit of the Disciplines, and a number of other books. I was I was sent a copy of The Divine Conspiracy by a guy by the name of Gary Haugen. He's the CEO of the International Justice Mission. And that book sat on my shelf for 6 months because I had just started at the White House. And I thought, what is Gary doing sending me this 300-page philosophical tome? I'm working like 16 hours a day. Is this an insult? Is this a provocation? And finally, I picked up the book after someone else recommended it. And I thought, well, if Gary's recommending it, and it was actually my pastor back home, I thought I better pick this up. And it was like a second spiritual awakening in my life. There are a couple things special about Willard. One, in this political and cultural environment, Willard is someone who was teaching, who was a Christian public figure throughout the 80s and 90s and into the aughts, who did not take his eye off the ball, who did not become swallowed up by culture war politics. There was no major scandal. So Dallas passed in 2013. And he is someone, for those who knew him, he is someone who was not perfect by any means, but he had grown in Christ-likeness in his life. And I think for young people in particular, but also I think just so many of us, there's just this question looming, like, is Christianity anything other than a power play? Like, is there a there? Does anyone really believe this? You spend a lot of time on college campuses. I've been spending time on college campuses, and this is like the central. This is a critical question. It's not just kids and their parents disagreeing on politics. It's I was raised with certain values, and I don't see how your politics comports with those values. And so, did you ever believe any of it at all? It's a really like existential crisis. And Willard is someone who stands there, again, not perfect. The last thing Dallas would have wanted is Willard sort of acolytes. But he was someone who was a profound example for me. The other special thing about Willard is he had a difficult childhood. He was actually, I'm from Buffalo, New York. He was raised in Buffalo, Missouri, and sort of rural poverty. He is someone who was not interested in a faith of platitudes. If it wasn't real, he didn't want a part of it. And so his theology is very focused on Christianity as offering knowledge, as holding up in real life. And so that was really important to me, and I think important in this moment in our public life.
And so he go into his moral and spiritual formation. I think of the phrase "the fruits of the spirit" when I think of him. So how do you become a better person?
Yeah. So so spiritual formation is not an option. Everyone has one. Spiritual formation, from a general perspective, is just the process, the inner process by which the character takes on a definite shape. Christian spiritual formation is directed towards Jesus. And so your formation is going to take place. It is going to be influenced. It can be influenced and shaped and directed by politics. It can be shaped and directed by whoever you count as a teacher. And so Willard had a vision had a conception of formation that he thought was just how formation took place in life. And he called it VIM, vision, intention, means. And that's how I wrote this book. It's how I argued Dallas wrote all of his books. Vision, you have to have a vision of what life is, what it could be. And then separately from that, you have to actually make the intention. You have to make a decision that it's not just an ideal, but something you're going to step into. And then means, you take up means to do that. And so in this context, in the context of this book, I have a chapter where I discuss a range of practices, both sort of tried and true celebration, confession, prayer. I think silence and solitude are especially important right now, but then also some 21st century spiritual disciplines that tackle some of the particular sort of political maladies of our day. So I talk about how to think about news consumption. I talk about breaking groupthink and some other practices as well.
My favorite one was reading the news as an invitation to prayer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Had to pray before writing the news.
Yeah.
Now, you have a story early in the book about JFK, and JFK gives a speech somewhere, and he has, of course, has a political problem that people are gonna. He's the first Catholic president. People are suspicious, and he says, "Don't worry, my Catholic faith won't influence my judgment as president."
Yeah.
Now, you don't quite think that's. I mean, he's solving a political problem.
Yes.
But how should one's faith influence one's political life?
Yeah. So right, I mean, it's a JFK solving a political problem, and it ends up being a really like defining truth for many people. I remember sitting at my I come from like a Italian Catholic family, and my family is pretty politically removed, not a lot of like political activism. I never forget, I get this job at the White House. I come back, I'm at the table with one of my aunts. She's asking me what I do. And I'm just expecting like that's go get them. And instead, my aunt's like, faith-based office. What about the separation of church and state? And I'm like, well, that's what why did I even leave DC? Like, what are we doing here? But it was that legacy of JFK for her. I also happen to work for Barack Obama. And Barack Obama had a very different approach. Barack Obama gave a speech in 2006 where he said that people were wrong to ask people of faith to leave their faith outside of the door when they entered politics. He called it a practical absurdity. And he said, try to imagine removing religion from American social movements. Where would Lincoln's second inaugural go? Where would William Jennings Bryan and Dorothy Day and Martin Luther King, where would they go? It is a practical absurdity, particularly in a democracy, to ask people to separate out and somehow quarantine where they're making decisions from and what counts as knowledge. I think part of the problem that we have is actually not an abundance of confidence in religious conviction. I think so much of the frantic bluster that we see from some religious actors in our politics is actually what it really shows is a profound insecurity, a real frantic anxiety that if certainty is not mustered up, if politics is not entered into, I talk in the book about a sort of a Christian model for politics that has been about imposition. I talk about Christians have there's a thread of Christians claiming a special status in America while pushing off a special responsibility. And that needs to be reversed. Christians need to draw on the best of what they have, like we would hope any citizen would draw on the best resources that they have access to, and enter into politics not as an act of imposition, but out of a spirit of loving service. We are here to serve, and we do that with humility about what we have to offer, but also confidence that our knowledge holds up and actually can be a blessing to our communities and to our broader public life.
Now, you went into the White House, obviously, and we in Chicago, when I was a reporter there, there was a phrase that Boss Daley once uttered that politics ain't beanbag.
Yeah.
That it's a rough and tumble world, that you're often competing against Machiavellians who have no scruple. Machiavelli himself argued that Christianity makes people suckers for evil men.
Yeah.
And so what was it like to be in the White House in a rough and tumble world and trying to practice the art of gentleness?
Yeah. Yeah, so I will say I think I benefited from the fact that I was in the Office of Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships. I don't know. I mean, I don't know from personal experience what it would have been like to be in the comm shop, to be battling with reporters all day, and so I that was somewhat helpful to me. I will say I do think we sometimes give into these dramatic depictions of what politics is like. So that our um, politics is not uniquely challenging to faithfulness. There are unique challenges that the faith brings, but I remember I was speaking at an event in New York, and after the event, there was a reception. This woman comes up to me and says, I'm so glad you're there in DC, that you're trying to, follow the Lord there. It must be so difficult. I started to get the idea that she thought that I was trying to be faithful, but not exactly successful. And we had been talking for 10 minutes, and I finally asked her, what do you do? And she goes, oh, I work on Wall Street. And you just go, maybe these are all kind of vocational questions. Um, are the tools of anger and fear and manipulation um, are hazardous to the soul, but B, I think we need to be very careful about even thinking that they're as practically useful as we make them out to be. People will say, well, Donald Trump won in 2016. Donald Trump is also facing what, like 90 indictments, 100. I mean, it's like the McDonald's hamburger sign. How many hamburgers have been, uh, um, uh, 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 but it's a good question to ask. Is Donald Trump a thriving person? Is Donald Trump flourishing as a human being? And like, part of the difficulty here has been, I think we have a model of what success looks like as a human being that, until politics got involved, Donald Trump was our cultural depiction of what it meant to be successful as a human being. On the cover of Playboy, gold toilets, like whatever he had. And so again, this very quickly gets into, and then all of a sudden he was in politics, and then all of a sudden people wanted to turn that spigot off. They wanted to say, oh, no, let me tell you about Donald Trump's failure as a business. Well, culturally, we extolled him for 30 years. So all of this very quickly gets back to the kind of person you are. What do you think anger is accomplishing in your life? And what do you think you can accomplish with anger? And we need to have very serious questions about that. The testimony of many over the ages, whether it's Augustine, whether it's Howard Thurman, is that anger is something that you think you're using, and very quickly it ends up using you.
Now you right here, you've spent your life at the crossroads of politics and religion, which is, I would say, a bloody crossroads. So give me your high point. Like what's a moment where you felt, I mean, there's a reason you've devoted yourself to this. So give me a moment where you've seen the best.
Yeah. Gosh, those were heady days after President Obama was inaugurated. I had the responsibility of making sure Reverend Joseph Lowry, who was the first head of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, very close friend to Martin Luther King Jr., he gave the benediction at the first inaugural in 2009. And I had the responsibility of making sure him and his wife Evelyn were taken care of, that they got up to the parade route after the inauguration. And so I'm 20 years old at this time, and I am I hope that made everyone feel as old as it made me feel saying. And so I am pushing Reverend Lowry in his wheelchair, get him on the parade stand. They have everything they need. And I go, that's like the last thing I had to do today. There was a prayer service in the morning. But after that, I was done. So I go, I'm going to watch the first family walk down Pennsylvania Avenue for the first time. I step down from the parade stand, step on the side of Pennsylvania Avenue, and the first family walks by. And I hear someone next to me say, my. And I look over, and it's Martin Luther King III. And you just go, what am I doing here? What is happening? And then just very briefly, so that is a very embarrassingly young Obama staffer story. Let me tell something a little bit more substantive. The president signed an executive order reestablishing the faith-based office, the Office of Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships. And part of what he established was an advisory council of religious and secular nonprofit leaders. And so they all came in, or 13 of them came in for the signing of the executive order in the Oval Office. And you watch these leaders walk down Executive Avenue up to the West Wing, and it's the head of the Episcopal Church and the chief lawyer for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops and the head of religious outreach for the Human Rights Campaign and the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. And that advisory council would disagree on things over the course of but to be in that room, to think that maybe there are ties. Well, it felt like a sure thing in that room that there are ties that bind, that we could be a nation, a people of common aspiration, and that Christianity specifically could play a positive role in that direction and not be undermining the possibility for that was tremendously powerful.
Okay, we're going to go to questions soon. I'm going to ask you, before we do, to read a paragraph from your book. And I put it in the context that I'm sure we have people in the room who are of faith and people in the room who are not of faith. But I just want to remind people why faith, and I guess in your case, Christianity at its best, is so radically countercultural. And so we are especially in this neighborhood and this city, we're in a city of conditional love, frankly, high achievement. I always say Washington is the most emotionally avoidant city on the face of the earth. And so I'm going to ask you to read this paragraph, which I found very beautiful as a counterpoise to that. And you'll see that I've did down there.
Importantly, God does not love you for who you are pretending to be or what you are striving to achieve. He does not love you for your ideas about yourself. He does not love you for your good deeds. He loves you. You do not have to. You cannot earn it. It is in the light of God's love for us that we are finally freed from the bondage of performance. Practically, life with Jesus is the only kind of life in which we are free from the need to perform.
Okay, so anybody have any comments and questions, knowing that we'll all be judging your performance as questions? Right here.
Okay. Yeah. He named his book A Promised Land. How do you explain that? And Obama came in some ways he did suppress Christianity, did support extreme Islam. Where do you find the balance there? So there are issues with Obama in your area.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could have a offline conversation about some of what you said. Here's what I would say. The president, there was a phrase from MLK that became sort of common parlance. It was even embroidered on the Oval Office the rug in the Oval Office. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. This is a phrase that actually came from a Unitarian minister or a Congregationalist minister a century before, Reverend Theodore Parker. And both in the context of Parker and King, it's really clear that the idea of the arc of the moral universe only made sense to them in the context of there being a God of justice. That it is not human political programs and ideas that bend the arc of justice. That we actually aren't progressing toward that end of the arc of the moral universe. It's actually the God of justice who's moving towards us. Something that happens in political language is like once a phrase is used, it becomes all staff it becomes something that staff can insert anywhere because it's already approved language. And so like that's why it's actually really powerful if you can get something into a presidential speech sort of once, then you could do it over and over and over. Like that line really makes this. But so I did like a search of like I think in the president's original usage of the term, I think it's like the moral weight of it sort of made sense, and I think the president did have he was very aware of the theological sort of implications of it. But if you search the phrase on like the White House archives, my favorite one was this was in his speech for Nordic state leaders. So he says, "I'm so glad we're gathered here. We'll celebrate. I'm looking forward to dancing, but we're really here because you all, Finland, Norway, are bending the arc of the moral universe." And I just thought, maybe the original usage was a little more on point. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think the question was the role of anger and a grievance politics, particularly uh, in response to President Obama's presidency. Look, I think so much that I talk about in this book is, and I talk about anger a great deal, is um, uh, really good as a mode of self-analysis first. And we really need to be cautious about too quickly. So I said before, politics is causing spiritual harm, and it's because Americans are going to politics to get spiritual needs met. That's a question that you should ask yourself. I would not advise in the middle of a political conversation saying, "Oh, you're saying you have a position on gun control, but you're really, are you sure you're not going to politics to get your spiritual needs met?" It can quickly become a form of like sort of spiritual or emotional sort of manipulation, and we want to be really, really careful about that. I think that there are a lot of things sort of politicians create a backlash, but President Obama was a very powerful generational force. I think as I look back on my time and our time in the White House, I think there are worse things than taking the posture of being the responsible adult in the room. And Republicans certainly made it easy for him to do that in many cases. But I do think that there were times in which that was effective politically, but I think made some people feel that they're sort of they were being cut out of the American sort of story about what was acceptable within an American consensus. Like, right? So if I'm the responsible one, the implication is you're irresponsible. And there's a lot of irresponsibility in our politics, but I have been sort of thinking about what makes folks say let's blow this up. Let's like the system isn't working. I'm not being heard. We don't need to be overly sentimental about that. People need to be held accountable, but I just wanted to sort of respond to that. The other thing I'd say, and this is more at the personal level, there's this idea that you'll see it like every Thanksgiving. There are these op-eds like, don't let your uncle get away from Thanksgiving dinner table without correcting his political opinions. And my question is always like, is your uncle a sitting United States senator? In this room, there probably are some people with, but if not, maybe let your uncle finish his meal. You know, like maybe the moral burden is more dignifying your uncle as a human being. Like if you don't know that your uncle has even bothered to get to the polls in the last 2 decades, if their political expression is primarily yelling at the TV screen, then I think we just need to think about the moral burden of political engagement differently. And then just really quickly, just one last thing is we just have a duty to ask where are the places in which we could release some of the pressure that people are feeling. I think right now we have a politics in which we think drawing any limits on our political ambition is a concession. We think providing any comfort or even identifying a worthwhile point in a view that we overall object to, that is sort of giving something away. And so we avoid the truth of the situation. But like the truth is that most of the issues we're dealing with, this is going to sound like a trope, but good points to be made on both sides. And I think we're seeing that. What happens is, for years, I mean, just to give an example, for years, Democrats will say, nothing happening at the border. But what do we see? Well, clearly something is happening at the border, because we've just spent months negotiating a compromise on it. And the White House is saying that there's an issue that needs to be addressed, and they're addressing it. But we play these political games, and we won't acknowledge reality until we have to politically. And that builds up pressure among folks. This happens in the Democratic Party too.
Thanksgiving advice. Begin the conversation with the topic, things I've always resented about you. Never even around the politics, it won't be so bad.
I would love to hear your thoughts on how this apply in a secular space.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of secular and our spiritual reliance on,
Yeah.
but are in the camp.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I really struggle with this question. You know, for spiritual background, you aren't having any spiritual background. So I love that you've spoken really well to the faith translation. How would you translate this spiritually from?
The question was, how do you translate what Michael was saying to someone who's spiritually covered, who's secular?
Yeah, but spiritually.
Spiritually. I turned it off. That's the most un-Brooks-like activity I've ever. So the question was, of the things Michael is talking about, how do you translate it to somebody who's secular but spiritually suffering from the maladies Michael has described?
Yeah. So, I mean, quite a bit of it are just, I think so many of us feel this, the psychological manipulation of our politics, the fact that we're just soaked in and constantly on the receiving end of, billions of dollars worth of people vying for our attention and our affections. And you don't like that is just, people are struggling with this across backgrounds. There are also some truths about politics that I think are can be informed by religious tradition, but don't. They're identified elsewhere. So, in the book, I lay out, politics is not ultimate, but penultimate. It's not dogmatic; it's prudential. You don't need to have a theological education or convictions to understand that the history of public policy in this country and anywhere else is a history of unintended consequences. And even people with intentions that they would affirm down the road would say, I should have went a different way about it. I thought I was completely right in the moment, but what was executed, what was implemented, didn't achieve what I thought it would achieve. And so humility can be resourced by faith, but it's also resourced by history, by experience. And so I think we need to free people up. When you have a politics that's driven by aversion, othering, and moralization, you create an environment in which people need to muster up certainty in order to perceive of themselves as good people. And so you have a politics in which people are constantly working up that there's nothing wrong with their side or with their own position, and we need to give people permission to introduce some nuance and uncertainty. What a philosopher who's a friend of both David's and mine's, Jamie Smith, says our politics should be tinged with ambivalence. And I think that's exactly right. But we have so little ambivalence in our politics today. Yeah. So the question is about how to deal with criticism of pastors who will talk about politics from the pulpit,
But
essentially.
it sounded like the person was asking about progressive issues. It sounded more like
Yeah.
racism, LGBT.
Yeah. So this is something that is coming up quite a deal, quite a lot, and something I'm hearing from pastors is there are we live in such a politically charged culture that even if pastors aren't intending or even thinking that their comments, sometimes just reading from scripture, is political, they get emails after, why did you say this? And sometimes the response is, that was literally just the lectionary reading of the day, like that's, take it up with the gospel, look, I think, look, the real, there's a real danger as a pastor in leveraging the authority of the pulpit and applying that to prudential political opinions. There may be times where that where that is justified, but I do think it gets confusing for members of a congregation, any congregation. You really have two options. If the pastor is, and again, I'm not talking about speaking out against injustice. I'm talking about like offering, here's how political actors should act on this issue. Pass HR, whatever. Minimum wage has to be here. The danger, the more instrumental you get, the more you speak to specific policy instruments. The congregants really have two choices. They can either approach that as the same authority the pastor has when he's reading the gospel is the same authority his political opinions have. Or they say, well, I disagree with the pastor on politics. And if he's wrong there, it's probably just as wrong when he's interpreting scripture. I think that's a lot of what we're seeing today, which is this conflation of politics, which, you know, I think it's certainly, there's a lot of evidence it's happening on the right. But I think we see it in a number of environments. And I actually talk in the book about some instances of this on the left. But this idea, again, that Christianity just offers a rhetorical toolbox that we can draw on to make whatever political argument that we actually want to make. I refer to it in the book as political therapeutic deism. This idea that God exists just to provide supplemental support to the political opinions we already have. And that undermines, that is dangerous in public because you're leveraging a very charged idea and concept. You're leveraging religion for political purposes, but then it does great damage to people's own spiritual life. Yeah. So the question is, what does progress look like? What's a success of this book's message look like? And I'll just quickly say two things. One, I think Christians have been in reactive mode. Getting surprised and off their footing by politics sort of happening to them. And so every time a presidential election comes around, there's this, gosh, how do we just get through this? And I think that is not a great position for Christians to be in. And so my hope for Christians for this book is that this book helps them to place politics within and under the life of the church, as opposed to how we've often treated politics in this country among various Christian streams as politics being above, which is a idolatry, or outside and irrelevant too, which is a sort of apathy. I think for the broader public, look, I think there are a lot of reasons for the broader public to be skeptical of the Christian political engagement. The one of the problems with a distrust of Christian political engagement is that we need to figure out how to live together. And if we cannot figure out what it means to have a thriving, pluralistic American future that is going to include all kinds of different faiths, including Christianity, then the antagonism that we see now is going to be nothing compared to what lies ahead. And so my hope is that there will be a growing perspective that Christianity offers resources that are oriented towards the good of everybody, and that those resources are something that can nourish a pluralistic society, and that we could see a reversal of the trend. The polling has absolutely plummeted on this question of, do you think religion is part of the solution to America's problems or part of the problem itself? That used to be an 80-20 question in America. Now, people would disagree exactly how it was a solution. It is now a 50-50 question that has really serious political and cultural consequences. It's not non-religious folks' job to turn that around, but we need to be explicit and direct and confident that if a Christian politics is not oriented towards the good of its neighbors, it is not Christian in its character. And that's what I advance.
Time for one final question. Okay, and well, I see one over there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested, David, if you have examples of this. I do. I mean, there's a moment during the presidential campaign in 2016. Um, a, a young man stepped up to the mic at a town hall that John Kasich was hosting, and he said that he had tried to he had attempted suicide just months earlier, but he had been given hope by John Kasich's presidential campaign, and he asked Kasich for a hug. And I think like there's a potential road you go down where you say, where John Kasich would say, you know, this is the hope I'm bringing to America, and like all this kind of stuff. And instead, he just like quietly hugs this guy, and very clearly, like sort of off mic, but it was picked up. Gave spoke to the man's soul and encouraged him, and then sort of moved on. There was no sort of political extraction that was sort of taken from it. I think similarly of the infamous moment of John McCain at the town hall in 2008. It's a very difficult thing to have people waiting to clap for you to say, my opponent is going to destroy America. But you need to be afraid of my opponent. And for John McCain to not use that lever, to not use that tool in the toolbox, was sacrificial on his part. I think reflected his sense of duty and country. It also opened up all kinds of opportunities for the country, so that inauguration weekend, for instance, the president and the person he defeated, John McCain, were appearing together in a dinner celebrating McCain's legacy. That's not everything. That doesn't solve everything in our politics, but like there are these cracks. There are so many stories I could share. Stories of Chris Coons and Jeff Flake talk about looking at each other across a committee room and deciding in that moment that they were going to break from both of their parties to force an issue on committee. So I think it happens all the time. I think part of the difficulty with gentleness in politics is it is then not gentle to parade around and say, look at what my gentleness got me, or like, but it's there. And I'll just briefly say, I have at the Center for Christianity and Public Life, we have the incredible honor of working with young professionals and civic leaders who are living this out in all kinds of ways in their daily lives, and they're a blessing to the city and to our nation and to our country. The question was like, are there examples? Anger seems like it's such a pathway to success. Are there examples of gentleness and grace being politically viable.
Okay, I think Michael will be signing books.
Okay, I'm sorry, we do have to wrap it up. I know we have a lot more we could talk about, but thank you very much to both of you. Thank you, Michael. And thanks to all of you for coming tonight. And if we could have you just fold up your chairs and put them against one of the bookcases on the side of the room so we can make room for the signing line, which I believe we'll be setting up over this way. Just give us a couple minutes and we will get everything ready to go. Thank you again.